who ignore evacuation orders. On top of everything else, Irma will create a storm surge up to 4 meters high in some places, and the governor's chilling warning is it will cover your house. The eye of the storm is expected to drive up through the state early tomorrow, so there's no secure sanctuary anywhere in Florida. People who've stayed are making as many preparations as they can, but looking at what's been happening in the Caribbean, major damage and loss of life are possible. And the CBC's senior meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe is in Pompano Beach, Florida, ready to answer any questions you might have about Hurricane Irma, its threat to Florida, and the devastation it caused in the Caribbean. So to ask your questions, just go to the CBC News Facebook page or the CBC News YouTube page as well. Johanna, thank you for joining us. Looks like the winds are still gusting there. So, why don't we just start by you sort of describing the situation where you are right now and the latest?
Well, Arthi, yeah, as you can see, the winds have really picked up behind me. Pompano Beach is just north of Fort Lauderdale. And an hour ago, there were a couple of hundred people on the beach behind me, locals and people from the inland and surrounding areas coming to check out these incredible waves, over 6-foot waves happening in the Atlantic Ocean right now. These winds are all associated with the outer bands of Irma. We've seen some rounds of rain. It is going to get worse. Right now, the wind gusts are about 60 plus kilometers per hour. Pompano Beach is not under an evacuation order, but it is under a hurricane warning. And in the past hour, police came by with their sirens announcing that anyone who wasn't a local was to get out of the area and hunker down. Locals have a curfew tonight. And as I mentioned, Arthi, we're still a good 24 hours away from seeing hurricane force winds. Things will continue to deteriorate until then.
And now one of the key factors here as well is that we're hearing a lot that even though it was downgraded, as you mentioned, to Category 3, that there is a lot of possibility here for it to regain its strength as it continues to barrel forward towards Florida State. So what do we know about how much more powerful or the regaining of strength for Hurricane Irma?
Yeah, I've been watching the models closely, Arthi, and in fact, I might be able to pull up my graphics here that I have access to. Got a satellite shot showing its current location. It is still skimming that Cuba coast. Downgraded to a Category 3 this morning because it interacted with the land and that cut off its fuel supply, the warm waters, just briefly. It is moving northwestward, though, so getting back into incredibly warm waters. We're talking 31, 32 degrees, abnormally warm for this time of the year, likely re-strengthening to a Category 5. Now, the real question that we've all been watching is when that turn will happen. It is yet to make that northern turn and make its way to the peninsula. Because it made landfall in Cuba, that's what slowed it down. That's why the turn's happening later. That's why the latest projections are West Florida. That's the latest look, is an early Sunday morning landfall in southwestern Florida. So watching that closely, I think I might even be able to show you the radar, and we are starting to get into those outer bands. But you can still see the eye. We're not that far away, about 300 kilometers from the Florida Keys, about 400 kilometers from us here in Pompano Beach, Arthi.
And Johanna, just a reminder, of course, to our viewers as well, we are streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube, and we're taking your questions and putting them to CBC senior meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe. And we do have a question here from Sean Rufus, who's asking, as we continue to focus on Hurricane Irma, where is Jose going, Hurricane Jose, because we know that there are 3 hurricanes spiraling through the Atlantic.
Yeah, just incredible, the intensity of the Atlantic basin right now. If I'm able to take you back to my graphics, I set up a satellite shot to show you where the 2 are spinning right now. Jose is just beginning to enter the Leeward Islands, unfortunately in a very similar location to the storm that with the path that Irma just took. So it does look like Barbuda will be hit next. Let's see if I can fast forward through this graphic. The path is not going to be the exact same as Irma, so there is some good news for the rest of the Caribbean and Florida. It's not far behind, but because of the weather patterns that direct these storms, Irma is actually taking a slightly northward track. There was a cold front that moved through the continental U.S. That's going to hold it back and help it steer northward. So while Barbuda is looking to take a direct hit once again, or at least a close call over the next 12 to 24 hours, really deteriorating tonight, it'll then veer northward. Atlantic Canada certainly watching the long range forecast, but the paths are not identical, Arthi.
And Johanna, we also have another question here from one of our viewers on Facebook asking, this is Becky Bai, and she's asking, are the Keys in the greatest danger, or is all of Florida expected to get hit? We know it's an evolving situation, so what does it look like for the greatest danger?
Good question, Becky. So the Florida Keys certainly getting the biggest impacts. That's where we're going to see storm surge over 10 feet. That is where we're likely to see the closest landfall, or at least the eye of that storm passing closest. They're at low levels, and the topography of the ocean floor around it means that storm surge is greatest, along with flooding and very strong winds. By the time Irma gets to the Florida Keys overnight tonight into tomorrow morning, we'll be back to over 250 km/h winds. So yes, Florida Keys getting hit the hardest, but all of the peninsula has seen big impacts. Even though that track has shifted westward, moving up towards the west coast, the east coast behind me still getting hit with those outer bands. The peninsula is not very wide. The eye of the storm is over 50 kilometers in width. It's fluctuating, but that means the eye will cover almost the entire peninsula once it moves inland. So the east coast seeing big risk for storm surge. There are no tornado warnings down on the Florida Keys. We'll be watching for that on the east side of the storm as well. And that's why the governor and officials are urging everyone across Florida to hunker down and to be prepared to be hit by a big storm in the next couple of days.
And you know, Johanna, you touched on it right there, that officials are being very clear in saying that really that window of time for people to get to safety is narrowing a lot as time passes. And we know as these systems continue to come towards Florida, but we have heard them urge all of the residents in the area to get out, especially the affected communities. So we've got a question here from Alex Ramirez, and he asked, did most people evacuate? What do you know on that front?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially because we have been talking to locals on the ground. So just through conversation, I can tell you a lot of people have left. We ourselves, our team of 3 here, have been through 3 hotels in 2 days. Our first hotel we were at in Miami under the evacuation order, so we packed up and headed north. Second hotel at risk of being evacuated and seeing a storm surge, we packed up and moved farther inland. And everyone we talked to in the hotels had evacuated either from the Keys, from Miami, from coastal areas. People here are taking this very seriously. Now, we're also talking to locals in the Pompano Beach area, not under evacuation order. Mixed reviews. Some people say we've lived through hurricanes before. We know this is going to be bad, but we can handle it. Other locals, we spoke to one woman who has been here for 30 years, said she lived through Wilma, I should say, on a top level of her apartment near the beach. It was swaying, so she is scared for this one. She actually moved to a hotel. That hotel then got evacuated, so she's back in her apartment, but hoping to hunker down on lower levels. So it sounds like people are taking this seriously. People say normally for a hurricane that brushes the peninsula, they get ready for hurricane parties. Talking to people in gas lines, that is not the case. This is a serious situation and people know it.
And now we've got a lot of focus, of course, on Florida and the state and all of the individuals who are staying in there and who've had to evacuate as well. But we've got another question here from our viewer, Neeraj Narula, and he's wondering about the damage in Punta Cana.
Punta Cana, yeah. So this storm did slide through the Caribbean. We did see damage to the Hispaniola. Luckily, the eye stayed a little farther north, but as it moved towards Cuba, narrowing back in. So the eye is quite crucial as far as how much damage we see. Even though it's a huge storm, you could, for those of you who remember Hurricane Andrew that hit Florida, Irma is twice that size, so its breadth is much more massive than other storms we've seen. However, the impact where we're getting those 250, 300 km/h gusts is quite small, and that's why Punta Cana did see some damage, not as badly hit as places like Barbuda or the Cuba coast is getting hit right now. You're probably noticing some people behind me. Right now, locals who live in this area are still allowed in this area, but there will be a curfew tonight, and coming down to see these incredible, incredible waves.
And now just another reminder, of course, to all of our viewers on Facebook and YouTube, we are taking your questions. There are plenty of them coming in. We are trying to get to as many as possible. And of course, thank you again to Johanna, who is diligently answering all of them. We've got one more question here to get to with Karen DeCare Peterson, and she is asking, is it true that some cruise ships are still sailing out? Certainly doesn't seem like it would be a safe time to be heading out on a cruise ship.
Yeah, Arthi, I'm not sure what the status on the cruise ships are, but I can tell you all of the flights out of Miami were canceled as of yesterday. The flight we took in was empty. They added extra seats in the back so that they could get people out before flights are canceled. So as far as cruise ships go, I'm not sure. I heard from somebody yesterday who said that she was hoping to get on a cruise in a couple days, and we said that is likely not going to happen. The swells offshore are now really picking up, so it's getting dangerous around the coast of Florida. The area that is being impacted is a couple hundred kilometers in diameter, if not more. So I would imagine that cruises are canceled unless they're able to get above the storm to get people out. But now we're starting to get to the time where that window is closing.
All right, Johanna, and we've got another question here, and this is in regards to preparations that are taking place. And we know that officials are doing a lot to make sure that shelters are well resourced, and there's a lot of staff and resources out there to make sure that people can remain safe. But in terms of the hospitals, we've got a question here from Krum Filipov, and he asks, what have the hospitals in Florida done in preparation, and will they evacuate or will they continue to operate?
I think, Arthi, it really depends on where that hospital is situated. There has been a lot of work in advance of this storm, especially on the East Coast, to get people and places into safety. And that includes hospitals, care homes, getting people to safer locations. We were hearing calls out on the local media, local radio stations, looking for volunteer nurses, looking for people in the past couple of days to give blood ahead of time. But again, that window is closing. People are going to have to start hunkering down in place. We're also getting the latest alerts from our local region through text messages, and they're letting us know what emergency shelters are full, what ones are still open. A lot of them are filling up. There are still areas that people can go to. And I have to tell you, there's a big police presence. We saw it when we first landed on Wednesday at the gas stations, helping to direct people. The officials at the hotels have been on top of their communication with officials. And here at the beach, again, we had the sheriff come by and make sure we were in a good place, make sure we had an exit plan over the next couple of hours.
And now, Johanna, I know you have touched on this, but understandably, of course, it's a concern for those living in Atlantic Canada as well. So maybe I'll get you to answer this again for Mara Violet, who's asking, how badly will this affect the Maritimes in Atlantic Canada?
Yeah, that is certainly a question we're watching. So let's start with Irma. Right now, again, those westward shifts taking Irma up the west side of the peninsula impacted the whole peninsula before veering northwest inland. It looks like it'll really slow down once that supply to the warm water is cut off, possibly impacting the lower Great Lakes. We'll have to look. That's pretty far in the long-range forecast. Jose, that's following farther behind, impacting Barbuda and the northern Leeward Islands tonight. That is veering farther to the north. The Canadian Hurricane Center is watching both of these storms very closely. If there is any impact, we're talking 5-7+ days in the forecast. And it's probably Irma that will impact Atlantic Canada, if at all. And again, too early to tell.
Now, we are, of course, focusing on the Caribbean that has been hit and also Florida. So there's a question here from Matt Levesque, or Matt Levesque, and he asks, how will Irma affect other nearby places?
Well, the focus really is right now on Cuba and Florida. That is going to be the story over the next couple of days. Even if there is variation in track, conditions should start to improve in the northern coast of Cuba through the overnight as the storm pulls away. Again, it's such a large storm. The back end of this storm will continue to hammer Cuba through the overnight. It is going to take a long time for this storm to track up the northern peninsula. We're talking deteriorating conditions in the south through today. By Sunday, and I think I've got a track map to show you where it's headed. Through Sunday, that's where we're looking at landfall in the south, tracking up that west coast. It really slows down once it hits land, which unfortunately means concerns for tornadoes and flooding along with that storm surge. It doesn't exit Florida up into Georgia until Tuesday, Wednesday. So that's really the focus now. As we head into the longer range forecast, we'll be watching for how it stalls out and whether that brings rain to the panhandle of Florida, the Georgia area. But the next 3 days, it is here in Florida that's the concern.
And now I believe you've answered Nancy Wilson's question as well in your last answer, and she was asking how bad is Cuba supposed to get hit, and that, as you mentioned, is something that we'll have to continue to watch as we see that system pull through. So I am going to go to Janice Tedford's question here, and she's wondering about the number of hurricanes because, as we've mentioned, there's Jose, there's Hurricane Irma, and Katia as well. So maybe just a few details about how many we're really watching and where they're going.
Yeah, fair enough. It has been an incredibly busy past couple of weeks in the Atlantic Basin. It is abnormally busy as far as how intense these storms are. Back-to-back major hurricanes, back-to-back likely major landfalling hurricanes in the U.S. is historic as far as anything we've seen in the record-keeping books. It is interesting to put it into context, though. The past decade has been fairly quiet as far as landfalling storms, especially in the U.S. So all of a sudden getting these two back-to-back storms enhanced by outside factors, climate change definitely making these two storms worse, bigger storm surge, more fuel, stalling out of Harvey. So there is something that's making them worse. And this is a bad year, but it's also in comparison to what has been a fairly quiet past couple of years, relatively speaking.
So this would be quite unusual, which is also answering one of the other questions that we got here from viewers. We just also did want to take a look at the scene where you are. And even since we've started to talk to you, it looks like it has intensified. The winds, the waves. What's the scenario where you are right now? Maybe we'll get you to revisit that.
Yeah, sounds good. So, Arthi, I'm here on Pompano Beach, just north of Fort Lauderdale. We are not under the evacuation order. We are under a hurricane warning, and the evacuation orders do come very close, so people here are taking it seriously. We were out here a couple of hours ago, a couple hundred people on the beach to see the waves. We even had surfers, kite surfers, one near drowning of a kite surfer just a couple of hours ago. The police have come and got everyone off the beach. They came by with a loud siren asking everyone who wasn't a local to get back on the other side of the bridge, because we're sort of in a little bit of an outer island, so you have to cross a bridge to get back inland. They have shut that bridge down. We're in communication with the police so that we can be let back in. But yeah, as we speak, winds probably gusting over 65 kilometers per hour, sustained at probably 40-50 kilometers per hour. And I was just looking at the radar. We're in between rain bands. This is all the outer spirals of Irma. When we do get hit, and I imagine that'll be in the next couple of hours with another rain band, very intense downpours. The other thing we're watching for on the east side of the track over the next couple of days here, tornadoes. This is what we call, you probably heard it over the past couple of days, the dirty side of the track. That northeast quadrant of the storm is where we can get some of the biggest storm surge. So even though that storm is tracking westward, East Coast still looking at pretty big impacts.
And just a reminder to our viewers on Facebook, on YouTube, thank you so much for all of the questions you have sent to us. We are wrapping up now. I'll get one final question in to our CBC senior meteorologist, Johanna Wagstaffe. This is from Susan Longy Shores, and she is asking, what are journalists doing to stay safe? Understandably, people concerned about you and the rest of our team and all of the journalists that are out there.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Susan. We have an incredible team on the ground. I have a very experienced crew with me. Our camera has been through hurricanes before. We have contingency plans every step of the way. Safety is first for us. That's why we've evacuated a couple of hotels now. I think we're in contact with the police. In the next couple of hours, we'll probably head inland to our hotel where we have impact-proof windows. We have an emergency plan at our hotel, and that is far enough inland that we should be away from the storm surge. And I know all of our crews on the ground are putting safety first with backup plans every step of the way. So yeah, thanks for the concern, but I definitely have a great team here on the ground.
All right, thank you so much for this, Johanna. That is the CBC senior meteorologist, Johanna Wagstaffe, in Pompano Beach, Florida. And again, thank you to all of our viewers on Facebook and YouTube for those great questions. Now, as we go to break, there's more images of the devastation from Hurricane Irma that they left in the Caribbean.